I'm really proud of you. Well done, sir. And then you don't speak right.
Do you have like a rule up here, like no chewing on the joysticks?
No.
That should be a rule. Joysticks here, like, how did these get like this?
Use and abuse.
Yeah.
Like that thing. Sorry.
And he's getting mad. Throw him on the ground. His name is Cody Cole. Yours.
I did, yeah.
You said you finished demo on output?
Yep. I mean, I didn't read the end. I read where we have to stop.
Yeah,
How about you?
Yeah.
Do you have an idea of what happened? Because
Okay. The first
whoa,
murder.
whoa, hold on. Don't say anything specific. Don't say people, places, or how. I'm just curious because that'll all be part of the discussion at the book club. But just as in, how confident are you in having the answer you feel?
Well, the thing is, I'm 99% Kansas is the murder that you told me.
Yeah.
Because I know. Because like. I can think of like several things that could have happened. There's just like definitive like stories that make you like
Yeah.
how'd you cancel it for like
Down. Mario's Smash Pack canceled pretty much anything. But
I think
honestly,
your neutral air was safe this
and my neutral air also cancels everything. But his range is terrible. That's the thing. Mario's range is so bad. That's what makes it.
Don't go for it.
Don't go this way.
Andrew said don't go that way. Son, dirty enough to count.
Oh, okay. So I guess you're this way.
Oh, my water bottle leaked on my paper. My water bottle.
I'm I tried to shield it.
I was holding out.
Oh wow, this is really
Okay, hold on.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. I'm like,
I guess we use
I just
Yeah.
wrote it down. I can look some of it. No,
Oh,
yeah, you're right.
wow, this is
tournament
really
league
great.
stage? Yeah.
I know.
How about we just
I'm
make
gonna
it
be
either
so
easy now that we can
or,
Because
Yeah,
or
that's good.
maybe a little bit.
that's fine. Okay.
They do feel much bigger.
I know, it's like,
Gutter ball's all puny and small.
yes. What would you like? I want 18 pieces of salt water.
Oh, man.
No. So,
Cody's already got
next
it.
round. Okay. I already have letter. That's fine. Oh, it hit me.
Cody, I knew you would start doing that. When somebody gives him a letter, he starts playing dirty.
That was, you just barely bumped it.
The gutter ball training is tough. Not at all.
This is a lot different than the
Oh,
guy.
you almost saved me there.
It is. I can tell.
Well, I did it so you couldn't sweet spot it. Even if you like potentially.
Well, I don't know if I was close enough though. But I guess yeah, if you want to do it, sure, and you knew.
Just
that-
barely bumped it.
I got the purple shield too.
When I touch on gutter ball, roll it lightly, and then when somebody hits it, it'll hit it. Oh, I'm dead.
is no cycle tool. So you'll have to get on the sides of the arena.
Oh, stop. You almost got it.
I'll be back.
Yeah.
I don't know how that works. I don't know how they did that.
Gutter ball is how it works.
Gutter ball. Except with much smaller ball.
Oh,
What? How did that?
How did-
What?
That was the
Aw, dang it.
neither of our attacks hit.
At the very least, it should have canceled out or something.
Yeah.
Coming to this side.
oh, you almost.
No.
Why are all the balls coming back to you?
I think that's a recovery.
No, I was trying to.
Wait, so that's CR for me and
Oh,
CR for
okay.
you.
No, it's CRU for you.
Oh.
It's CRU for you and CRU.
Oh, you pretty much had to hit that. You,
Alright, let me go.
Gutter ball.
You're after Logan.
Gutter ball.
Do you wanna play?
okay, I guess so.
Alright,
Roll
you're
it
after
past me.
I've never played.
You're after Liam.
Okay, what's the
Wait.
order? 'Cause I've
It's
always-
me, Logan, Liam,
Keep not letting go of my shoulder.
Okay,
So
so we're
you-
just trying to hit that ball.
you
Okay, that's
are
not
after
so.
before it stops.
That's not so.
Or it goes to the hole.
Really, Cody? Really? I see that little smile on your face. It's not making me want to do anything.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to tell you. You can't. You have to do it. So what do you do?
Cody, have you seen that Andrew has lost his mustache? He looks like a can.
Oh, yeah!
Cody, really?
That's 2 for you.
Really, Cody? Cody, you really not fair.
Oh, you hit it! You hit it!
Yes, I did. Oh, right now.
You're after me. Liam, go, Liam.
You got a lot.
Liam, won!
Who's on left?
Wait, isn't that a CRU for me?
My son.
Looking for this? You have a
Oh my
CR.
gosh. Wait, Cody. That was bound to happen, Cody.
Oh, wait. These balls are so much shinier and better than the gutter ball.
The gutter ball, those ones are like rough and tough. Bam! You better move, Cody.
Oh, wait.
Cody, I think you're gonna die
No,
anyway.
see.
I'm doing all right.
I lost my voice.
It's not, it's my ultimate
Yeah,
secret.
I can't go high or
The knee is a close second.
Cause there I did so much.
Oh, watch out, Liam. Get it! Oh, you get a letter! Oh, I'll get it. Go, go, go. It's down.
Oh, it's your turn.
Go.
Hey, yeah. Cody's out. No, Cody, no. Cody, chill, Cody. Chill.
So okay.
Why
take
is
a
it
Self-destructed. Why?
About like 2 or 3 years ago, right? Right? I'm Dr. Mario. It gets right down to the end. We all have one spot. In fact, and we're all pretty high on it, right? I'm Dr. Mario. Michael is Captain Falcon. He charges up. He charges it up, and I go up to him. I'm standing on one side of him. Brandon's standing on the other side, and I kick him right as soon as Yeah. You should go to some. Yeah. I totally would be down for that. I love those types of games. Yeah. It has.
Oh, I
It
so
has like
good.
Skill
I
curve
just got
or
lucky.
but it's focused a lot less
That
on
was
like
right in that goal. There's a bounce off that random guy.
Like, you mean, is it more on technique as opposed to like,
it's
you
more
gotta be
on
combos?
understanding positioning, spacing, and the combos.
Yeah. I like that because I felt like the only thing that was discouraging with Street Fighter after a while is I feel like it's just like a arcade fighting version of like
Oh, look at it,
DDR.
moved up.
Yeah, like just throw the combination and get it perfect. Or like, you know, like Guitar Hero or something like that. You know, it's like it's less about like combat and more about just getting your sequences right.
Yeah.
That's actually one reason why I like the
No, I love the most of the Naruto fighting games.
yeah, and it was like that. It was like as long as you knew how the characters work and you understood how the other characters work, then you could just like very intuitively fight. It didn't matter if you knew how to do any sweet combos or anything like that. Like you could exploit characters and you could still do something like that. But it was more about the combat. I did up, down, right, circle, you know, like stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, is it or did
Yeah,
it
it's a new one.
Kick it. That was pretty.
oh no tag? Oh, like you did like switch and you did the characters.
Whoa, that was awesome. You
I
kicked
kind of like that. I feel like because I have the Capcom version, Marvel Capcom, yeah. Was it Marvel? Yeah, Marvel versus Capcom. I had that. Some of the characters were so polar opposite that as long as you picked two completely different characters, you were ready for any situation.
Yeah.
And you just punish your opponent for whatever was in front of your line. You know what I mean? It's like, but it was still fun. It was it'll always be so fun.
I really enjoy it because there is that physical aspect of it. But it's pretty much like how you so if you're on stage, you have to find out like whether it's like act or it's like medium. Yeah, solely back. And there was the other issue of there's no funds in the and instead of them giving them all to me like we usually do, they gave them all to people to do who then kept early and had them all different. So it's
It sounds like it has like
weird
it
should have instructions.
like where it's like you like actually really love that start. Yeah. We should you ever did a challenge?
Alexander Dodd.
And it's my pillow.
Yeah.
And it's my pillow. Because you spent
Are these your songs?
It's shocking how many of
Oh,
them.
no.
Oh my gosh.
Is that one thing you talked about the
That's the
camera?
this is the soundboard. So you turn the soundboard on. Separate things. Also, he was back downstairs.
Okay.
So go ahead and play something and I'll tune you in.
Are you
Yeah.
Where do you want us to plug in? Okay. Where do you want us to plug in?
Can't hear you.
Where do you want us to plug in?
Oh, any color you pick is fine, and then I can see what color you are, and then I know to turn you on or off.
Oh,
Does that make sense?
okay.
So all color codified. So I actually have guitar cable out for you. Right there, there's a purple and a yellow.
Okay.
And you can plug in a purple or yellow.
Okay.
And then I'll know that you're purple or yellow.
But they're not looking at it.
So right next to it is a DI box with purple and yellow going in. You see the purple and yellow going into the DI box?
Yeah.
I like it.
So at the end of a combo, it's different between like a 50 damage combo, which is an expert, and a
Not just some average.
So it's a matter
Liam
of how much
is yellow and I am purple.
Oh,
yeah, so like the pro, like an exchange, like 5 points.
Because that's all you get to know. All the combos are used up. But because
Alright, everybody, find a seat on the couches!
I got all the goals somehow. That worked so well.
The seat is saved. Yeah.
Found.
You can sit like right here.
What's this doing here?
I like it.
Alright, boys, put up the sticks, find a seat.
Yeah.
Pencils down?
No, that's for
I thought you
school.
said pencils down.
Pencils down.
Test is over.
That's a serious pencil. It's for when you're jousting with your homework. Alright, let's pray. Lord, we thank you for the chance to come and worship you. We thank you for the gift of worship. Help us to praise you now in song, to mean these words as we sing them. And just help us, Lord, to pull aside the distractions and leave us only with you. We ask that in your name.
There I find you in the Thank you for every single person here. God, I pray that you bless all the teachers this morning in every age group, God, that you would just speak through them. Lord, that we would just be used by you, God. Use us for your glory, for your kingdom. We thank you so much, God. We can come here and learn more about you, Lord. Please bless this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Lexi. Thank you, Liam.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry, Lexi.
No, don't be sorry. Once I realized I didn't have a mic, I just pumped up the volume as much as I could.
All that happened was so simple and sad. The mic goes through that monitor box, and if the power is plugged in, the mic does not go through the monitor box.
Oh, was it my bad? Should I-
No,
oh.
no, I always leave it plugged in. Someone yanked out the power cord,
Gotcha.
so I wouldn't have thought to tell you to plug in the power.
No, it's all good.
And so yeah, it'll
No,
just
it
cut your
happens.
mic every time.
It happens. We're good.
Oh wait, Andrew, wait. There's not two white cables in there.
There's just
Okay.
one.
So it wasn't plugged in two ways.
Okay, because yeah, the power is also not plugged in.
So wait, which is that? Is that line in or line out?
Mic in, but mic through, so it's mic out. There's no.
So where's the mic plugged into?
yeah.
Just follow that cable.
Or
It
Oh,
can't go
wait.
to the out. It
oh
doesn't
my
have a
god.
red
Okay.
cable.
Okay. Hold on.
Where does the white go?
Okay, it goes into this, and then this goes into this. So this the
So they did two cables into a box that goes nowhere.
yeah.
Who was last up here? Who would do that to us?
I don't know. Man, one Wednesday night and it's all.
One Wednesday night, it all falls
Okay.
apart.
3 is.
I wasn't here on Wednesday.
I just don't even understand because I'm pretty sure Jamie did worship on that day. Oh, it's red. He plugged it straight into red, Andrew. Your phone's not getting that's the
What
light
was I doing
cable.
on Wednesday?
Okay, so she was just in red the whole time. I probably could have got her, but no.
Because they were so close together. I'm like, okay, so this
The
goes
whole
down,
system's
and then
color
that's
coded.
there.
Why would you plug white into red? It makes no sense.
Well, white's plugged into white.
What was I doing though?
'Cause this is the one that's plugged into the box that goes nowhere.
Yeah. This is simple. Take away this. If someone actually wants them on this, you just pay them.
Good.
Oh well. We've solved the
Don't
mystery.
even start, Christian. Don't even start.
I actually turned it down because I don't think one spot when we fixed it.
Someone's
We should test that before next
Oh,
Wednesday.
Ezra, here.
Yeah, Ezra.
I didn't make you.
You brought my bedding, right?
No, my mom went
Andrew.
to Sacramento before I woke up.
Oh, what?
And my
This is honest to goodness what happened.
My pillow.
My pillow. I wanted a pillow.
I have your pillow.
I know, and it's the best pillow.
It's a pretty good pillow.
Andrew, did you bring his bedding?
I brought his bedding.
Oh, you should hold it hostage.
Yeah.
Andrew.
Yeah, hold it. My mom took it up.
Bad enough.
My mom almost sold it. She's like, oh, is that my pillow?
It's called my pillow.
Hey Daniel, could you hear us all the way from the trailer?
That depends which night.
Seriously in my
That's the brand.
The night,
The last night?
the first night ever seeing that night.
No, I did not hear Bad Nut from the trailer, but I was inside the trailer. When I was outside the trailer on Friday, I did hear Cabin 12.
Yeah, the cafe staff heard us.
They heard you singing Bad Nut?
At
I
last
was
night when
breakfast
Ezra
that
walked
night.
in and
It
said
was
bad nut
awesome.
and everybody flipped
Thanks,
out
Rob.
and started singing it, they heard it all the way from the cafe.
I may actually have it on video. I was filming the moon around 11:45 at night, and
Oh, you
and
were
I can just hear in the background.
We went till like 12:30.
Just
The
like
best
screaming.
part of that story is like Elijah had fought for at least 15 minutes to get those kids quiet.
He got them quiet, they were talking, Chris wanted to say
See,
something.
this makes sense because
Say something.
Saturday
yeah.
we're leaving.
Say
It's
something
over,
more like rap
and
song.
Elijah's demeanor is
He's
just
crazy.
gotta get home.
He's crazy.
Just gotta get home. Just can't. I'm almost there, man. It's almost. Hey, Daniel. We're almost done. We're almost.
11
We're almost
hours.
Ezra,
done.
so
We're almost
Ezra.
out of here. He was just
11
losing it, and I was like, what? What happened? Because he was okay Friday.
I messed him up, bro. I messed him up.
Poor Elijah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Me and my friend Audrey were at a different camp and
Uh-huh.
we skipped breakfast.
You just skip breakfast like every day?
No, just one day and then they
Oh.
brought us breakfast in bed.
They brought you.
What?
Dude, when you skip breakfast at our camp, we go and like shake your bed. We don't bring you
We
breakfast.
throw water on you, we tell you to get up.
They throw water on you.
Oh, then why don't you just skip breakfast?
Oh,
All right.
no, I
You
don't
guys
believe
do
it.
not have your Bible. Get up and get a Bible. We're gonna be reading Daniel chapter 3 today.
Ezra said we have to hear the rest of
Oh,
the
just
story.
get ready, Daniel.
Yeah, later.
Oh yeah, Daniel.
What's
I'll
up?
be here next
It
year.
was The doctor there, his
Really?
name was Dr. Bob, and I went to him every single day.
What for?
I'm not that old.
How did you know?
Stuff.
Stuff. Okay.
Daniel, I'm
Was
already
it because you liked Dr. Robin?
No, his name was Dr. Bob. Like,
Bob?
yes.
Oh, I heard Robin. I don't know why. Is it because you like Dr. Bob?
No.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's because you get out of doing stuff.
Oh, I can't play this game. My ankle hurts today.
Oh, I only do that.
It's terrible.
He copied it off of mine.
That's just terrible. Alright, guys, Daniel chapter 3. If you're in a borrowed blue Bible, turn to page 727. Okay, so Jaden, I'll have to show you later. The reason sound didn't work? Jaden? The reason sound didn't work, I'll show you later. It's because it was not turned on. I'll show you it.
I don't like that soundboard.
You have one
The
responsibility,
soundboard is
Jake,
not-
and that's to keep the soundboard on.
The soundboard is not the amp.
Next-
When you
next
turn the
trip, I
soundboard
was
on,
hoping
you still have to turn the amp on. Yeah.
Where do I turn it on?
It's from where you're sitting, you reach down with your right hand and tap, like right around knee height. A little lower than knee height. Maybe your knee height, because you're a little shorter. But somewhere right around knee height. I don't know, it's below my knee. Okay. You guys ever hear about Joshua the knee height?
What'd you say?
Shortest guy in the Bible? No?
Oh, isn't that the dude
Then-
that like climbed a tree?
Joshua the knee height.
He must be really short.
He's very short, exceedingly short.
No, Daniel.
Yeah.
The shoe heights.
Oh, the shoe heights, they were shorter. That's true. I forgot about the shoe heights.
What are the shoe heights?
They're only about as tall as a shoe.
Whoa.
Ezra, you never heard that?
They're a rat. That's a very large jump from short people to rat people.
Is that just what you call short people? Oh, you're one of those rat people.
You live underground.
Oh man, Jaden.
You're
You're very offensive. Jaden's in an offensive mood today. Alright! We're going to be looking at Daniel chapter 3 today. And if you guys don't recall, last week we had some very interesting stuff happening in Daniel chapter 2. We had the king having a dream of this ridiculous statue with a gold head, a silver chest with silver arms, a bronze belly and thighs, iron legs, and feet that were mixed, iron and clay. And then the dream was explained to him by Daniel to mean the empires as they rise and fall were going to take this order. And they were going to have these differences in them. They were going to increase in strength militarily. They were going to increase in strength in terms of like how long they lasted. But they were actually going to decrease in their royal power. So how much power does the king actually hold? How much might, how much authority is actually in the one man at the top? And so at the start, Nebuchadnezzar, emperor, king, whatever you want to call him, of the Babylonian Empire, his word was law. It didn't matter what he said. He could say death by chickens, and they'd have to figure it out. Like whatever he said, they had to do.
Chickens.
And then as you go on, people start to lose that military, or start to gain military power, and they start to lose that almighty kingship. And so we see in the Medo-Persian Empire, the king is actually up above everyone, but he's below the law. The law actually rules the king too. And then you get to the Greco-Macedonian Empire, and you have instances where generals would actually disagree with, would argue with Alexander the Great, would say, no, I'm not going to do that. And so you see a little bit less power. And then you get down to the Roman Empire, and this is where things start changing from emperor only into senate, into a congress of rulers and leaders coming together. And so over time, you have a decrease of one category, so you get less and less rare metals, less and less expensive metals. But then you have an increase in the other category. They get stronger, and so the metals do increase in strength. And so we actually we had a timeline here. All the way back here is the book of Daniel. This is during the Babylonian Empire, just the first few years of the Medo-Persian Empire. But it predicts perfectly, with details, the Greco-Macedonian Empire and the Roman Empire that are way out there that stretch all the way up to where the New Testament takes place. So really cool prophecies last week. And we saw, look back at the end of chapter 2 with me for a second. End of chapter 2, we read last week, verse 46 down to the end. It says, then King Nebuchadnezzar threw himself down before Daniel. So this is the king.
Is that my name?
Where are you looking? Ezra's right there. Yeah.
Why am I there?
That's a timeline of
Why
the
is
books of the
Daniel
Bible.
there?
Well, that's what that is.
That's where Ezra, it takes place in time. The book of Ezra is from mid 500s to mid 400s BC.
Actually, it's just a
Wait a
camp
second,
thing
so-
where it's how long the mental states of each person lasted.
No, I honest to God
You got
thought
through,
that
like, the
your-
first
your
day?
slides were tripping out. Like that's why they were up there. Something was going
No,
on.
it's just a timeline.
Ah, that's cool. Can you send me that?
Yeah, this is zoomed in a little, so it just shows the prophecy dates. It goes back past that. I have all the other books.
Can you send me all of that?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we actually looked at it in depth last week. Today I was just gonna glance at it.
I wasn't here last
What was
week.
that?
I don't know. You weren't here.
I was here
You
last week.
you don't usually show up on Sundays in junior high. I like you showing up on in Sundays in junior high though.
It's cool. I tried my hardest.
Do it.
He graduated from
All right.
No, that's
Anyways, that was all last week. Go back with me and read the end here of chapter 2. It says, verse 46, Then King Nebuchadnezzar threw himself down before Daniel and worshipped him, and he commanded his people to offer sacrifices and burn sweet incense before him. The king said to Daniel, this is key, listen, truly your God is the greatest of gods, the Lord over kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this secret. The king of Babylon, a pagan nation that has a multitude of made-up gods, said, Daniel, your God is the greatest. So he is literally understanding right here, right now, end of chapter 2, the God of Israel, the God of Daniel, the God of the Bible, is the greatest. He's above all other gods. Why does he think this? Well, because all the other God worshippers of other gods tried and failed to do what Daniel did. The king said, tell me what my dream was last night. That should be impossible. I mean, if you're just human, that's impossible. You can't do that.
I'm not
Oh, okay. Well, maybe you can do it. Are you like a weird human-shaped pile of jelly? Like, what are you? Something. Okay. We'll stick with something. We just read the end of chapter 2 from last week.
Wait, Daniel.
That's why I was.
Yeah, you had to listen and then you'd know.
Did,
Yeah.
did Daniel turn Nebuchadnezzar into a Jew?
Oh, just wait for it, man. Just wait for it. So here we go. King Nebuchadnezzar says, your God is the greatest of all the gods. He says, your God's the... You can just go get a Bible. You're not
You're
a
a leader.
Just get a
I was
Bible.
gonna wait till you like turned and then just like speed by as you're like looking at the screen.
Like my periphery wouldn't catch you. Want to get Ezra one? He doesn't have one.
Throw it at Ezra.
Frisbee it.
Here, Ezra.
Ezra catches it in his mouth.
Daniel.
Yes.
That's what I did last week.
I'm not, nope,
I
not.
left my grandpa to work for bear poop.
I couldn't hear you. I was shushing you too loud. All right, so Ezra. Nebuchadnezzar, other old-fashioned name. He actually declares the God of the Bible to be the greatest God. And he does it because of the dream he had and that Daniel was able to reveal it. Now, fast forward several years. We'll get to how many years in a second. Go to chapter 3. This is not like, boom, the next day. This is a few years down the road. He's been thinking about this prophecy that his kingdom's going to fall and that the Medo-Persians are going to take over. That's the prophecy he's been thinking about this whole time. And now check out what he does. Chapter 3, verse 1. This is page 727 if you just grabbed your Bible. Page 727.
Page 727?
Yep.
Wow, I was way off.
I was way off. It's like end of the Old Testament, but that still puts it pretty close to the middle.
I got it on accident. And
All right, so chapter 3, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then he sent messages to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials to come to the dedication of the statue he had set up. So all these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald shouted out, people of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. So with the sound of the musical instruments, they didn't listen yet. All the people, whatever their race or nation or language, bowed to the ground and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So here's the deal. King Nebuchadnezzar has this dream from God. You are the head of gold. You are mighty in authority. And there will come after you the chest and arms of silver. And after that, the belly and thighs of bronze. And after that, the iron legs and the clay feet of iron and clay mixture. And then King Nebuchadnezzar's like, you know what? It's been years. It hasn't happened yet. I think I'm just going to try and make my kingdom last forever. Heck with God. Heck with his vision and his prophecy and next nation coming up.
But I did like he called me gold, though. That was a good.
So I'm just going to take the whole timeline that God gave me and make it all gold. Just a full gold timeline. It's Babylon forever. This is his pride. This is his ego kicking in. He was impressed with God, but God hasn't done anything for him lately. And so he goes right back to what he's used to. Me first, I'm the best, my kingdom rocks. And you know what? In these intervening years, he has been doing some more conquering. He has been doing some more waste laying to land. I mean, he has really been going at it. Now, the date I'm picking as the most likely, after a lot of research last night, for all of this happening, is about 594 BC, so somewhere around 9 years later. The reason I'm picking this date is because we find out from other books in the Bible written at the exact same time as this, in different locations, that the king who was left over Jerusalem underneath Babylonian rule was suddenly, and for no reason given, summoned to go to Babylon. And so it would fit if there's only one instance we know of in history where the ruler of Jerusalem gets summoned to Babylon, and it's only 9 years after chapter 2, and it is before all the other chapters that come later. This would be the best date as far as when King Nebuchadnezzar summons all these rulers from all over the place. Because we only have Jewish history to go off of here that's that accurate. That's the best I can do. So 9 years have gone by as best we can tell. It's possible with the other things we know, it could be as much as 20 years. But I think 9 is the most likely.
Before God gave him his dream?
No. Since dream to building of giant gold statue, 9 year span in between, as best we can tell. And so here we go in the book of Daniel's time span. We're still in the very early portions. Obviously, we're in chapter 3, but there we go, our little red dashy line. That's how far along we are. So, read with me what happens next. Now remember, we left off with it saying everyone bowed and worshipped, but we're going to find out there's a contradiction here, meaning not quite everyone bowed and worshipped. Verse 8. But some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews. They snitched. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king!" You got to start with that flattery. Got to start with the brown nosing. You got to start puffing him up. "Long live the king! You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments." Notice they're directly quoting now. This is the ultimate suck-up. When someone else says something you have to do, and you go back and say, "So you remember how you asked me to do this, and you go into every little detail. Perfect quotation. You obviously were paying attention. Verse 11, "That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty." Now that is a bold claim. And I don't know if that's true. It doesn't seem true. But the next thing says, "They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up." That part I'm pretty sure is true. That matches with their character. It matches with what we know about them from before and what we're going to find out here in the next few seconds. So they refuse to worship the statue that he set up. Verse 13, "Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, 'Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you'll be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what god will be able to rescue you from my power?'"
Foreshadowing.
What do you guys think the answer to that question is?
I feel like I'm really happy
God.
that the king of Babylon was like such a big, puffed up dude.
So
Because
prideful.
It's like almost like he forced God to save Shadrach, Meshach.
I've actually had people ask me after going and reading Daniel, why does God pick on Nebuchadnezzar?
He deserves
And
it.
I feel like that's not the right
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
It's like, Nebuchadnezzar, why are you throwing rocks at God and expecting nothing to happen?
After he already
That's
saved
really
his
what's going
power.
on here. All right, so he throws this giant rock. What god will be able to save you from my power? And this little pebble bounces off God's big toe. Just like, what? Someone say something?
So like,
No, God is very aware of what's going on in the situation. But the character of Nebuchadnezzar is such that he puts all gods within this one big pool. He says that all gods are real. Even, the Jews who we conquered, we flattened, we obliterated, I believe their gods are real. That's kind of Nebuchadnezzar's belief system. All gods are real. But since I'm winning, automatically that means my gods are better than your gods. Because if your gods are better, I wouldn't be winning.
That makes sense.
That's his logic. That's not bad logic, but it is ignorant logic. He doesn't have all the facts. He doesn't realize God had been warning Israel for decades, for hundreds of years, follow me or else. I will remove my protection. And then anybody who's got a big army is going to beat you. For all these years, no matter how tiny their army was, God made sure they never lost. They never got beat. As long as they were following God, didn't matter how tiny their army was, they always won. Always won. And God kept warning them, if you can't just follow me above other gods, if you can't just follow the simple, small set of rules I've left you, then I'm not going to keep protecting you. And then it got to the point where they broke the rules enough times. He says, okay, so punishment's coming. I'm not warning you that punishment might come. Now I'm telling you, punishment is coming. And you have this way you can get out of it. Do this or punishment will come. And they didn't do that. So punishment came. And the punishment was Babylon's going to come to the south, Assyria's going to come to the north, and just lay waste to the country and kidnap most of the people. And so, yeah, they didn't listen to God. They didn't listen to the, tens of prophets that he sent out in advance to warn them. And so this is the punishment. So Nebuchadnezzar thinks he wins because his gods are stronger. He doesn't realize he wins because Israel's God let him. That is what he's missing. He does not realize that the God of the Bible let him win. And so in his mind, the fact that he won proves his gods are best.
Did the Jews not tell him that? Like, hey,
How do you go to the king and be like, yeah, we let you win?
we're about to get thrown into the fire. Might as well.
That's a good point, actually, and that's kind of the attitude they take up. Check this out, verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "O Nebuchadnezzar." They don't say, "Oh, live forever." They don't say, "Who is mighty above all."
Wait, no.
They just say, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar." Then they say this, "We do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up." What I love about this in the original language is the original language here in the Aramaic makes it very, very clear. They are avoiding every possible chance at using a royal declination. So when they say majesty, they're doing it in the most plain, unrespectful, not disrespectful, not slamming the king, most unrespectful manner they can. They're pulling out every lord they can manage. They're pulling out every "Oh, your majesty" they can manage. And so even when the translation is "Oh, your majesty," that's more the fact that you are king and not paying homage to how amazing and great a king you are. So like in English, when we say majesty, that's actually what we're saying. We're saying, "You're amazing!" But in the Aramaic, that's not what they're saying. They're saying, "Dude on throne."
Dude on throne.
That's what they're saying. They're saying the simplest
Right in the big
factual statement they can. It's not puffing him up and making him sound great. They're just saying, yeah, king guy.
Dude on throne.
Guy with crown.
Yeah.
They don't throw.
That's the simplest thing they could possibly say, and that's all they say. That's all they put out. Is just, yeah, obviously the king. We'll honor the, we'll denote the fact that you are in charge.
We
recognize, but we're not gonna respect. We're not gonna pay homage. We're not gonna, bow down before you. That's kind of the whole point. You see, this is a problem for them, and I wonder if anyone gets it, because he's not asking for something religious in one sense, and yet he is asking for something religious in another sense. Because on the one hand, he didn't set up a gold statue to Baal. He didn't set up a gold statue to Marduk. He didn't set up a gold statue to Nebo. He didn't set up a gold statue to any of the Babylonian gods. he built a gold statue that represents his empire. It represents the Babylonian rule. And when you bow down to it, you're not worshiping a god. You are paying homage to Babylon. You are respecting. You are giving allegiance. It's, guys, saluting the flag. It's putting your hand on your heart when you...
Don't you do it. Don't you do it.
Do what?
Do what you must.
Okay. It's putting your hand on your heart when they sing the national anthem. It's saying, I put this country as the highest thing I can put anything in. Now, there isn't anything wrong with liking the country you live in. There isn't anything wrong with saying the Pledge of Allegiance if you actually look at the words and check what they say. And if you really mean it, then say it. There's something completely wrong with saying the Pledge of Allegiance if you don't mean it. Please understand the word pledge. That is a promise you're planning on not breaking.
Like you're planning on not breaking?
You're planning on not breaking.
Is that the actual definition of a pledge?
It's a pledge. I vow I will do this.
What's a promise that you do plan on breaking?
I don't know.
An unpromised.
A pledge?
Pledge.
Pledge.
Just making up words now.
I don't know.
No, it's a synonym, but yeah, it means a little bit more than a promise. It's a pledge. Generally, you would give something, leave something, give up something to show, to prove you're going to keep that promise. So ordinarily, when you say pledge, you're talking about how, like, here, I give you my car, and you don't have to give it back until I complete my promise. Like, that's like you're putting more weight into the promise by putting a condition on it or putting an object that goes along with it. Does that make sense? It's a lot more like the things we see in the Bible, the covenants that we see. It's very similar to that. All right, so what is their problem with this? Their problem with this is that the Babylonian Empire is not just a governmental system. What comes with it is all these fake gods. And what he's asking for is for you to put Babylon above everything. And you can't do that. You can't do that when you worship God. God's number one rule. Do you guys know the Ten Commandments? Who knows the Ten Commandments?
I know.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
Commands
7, 8.
Does anyone know the Ten Commandments song?
No,
Number 1, we've just begun. God should be first in your life. Number 2, the idol rule. Those graven images aren't nice. Number 3, God's name should be never spoken in jest. Number 4, the Sabbath for our worship. No, you guys don't know this song. Seriously?
Never
It's
learned.
the only way I've memorized the Ten Commandments. Nothing else has worked through all the years. The only other thing I know that I won't forget is the first 4 are about you and God, and the last 6 are about you and other people.
Love
Like-
God, love people?
Yeah, that's literally the 10 Commandments, is love God, love people. It's 4-6.
Gotcha.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
So, first 2 commandments from God. These are the most revered of all the rules that the Israelites have. Number 1, don't put things first unless it's God. God should be the only first in your entire life. And Nebuchadnezzar's like, yeah, put Babylon first. And then, number 2, graven images, carved statues of things that you worship are bad. Don't do that. That's literally the first 2 of the 10 Commandments. And then, these 3 Jews are like, we can't do that. I'm sorry. You're asking for Babylon to be first. You're asking us for just to worship a graven image. These are literally the first 2 things God said don't do. And you're telling me to do them. This is why they have a problem with it. Obviously, this doesn't seem religious to Nebuchadnezzar. He's thinking like, yeah, Babylon's amazing. Don't you all think Babylon's amazing?
Pretty dope.
He doesn't think that's a religious request. Worship Babylon. It's just the culture he lives in. He looks at things very differently. But for these Jews, that's a very religious request.
Like, what does worship even mean to this guy? Like,
Pay homage, respect. In their case, it's literally like bowing down and muttering some nonsense about how great Babylon is.
that's
In his mind, he's the ultimate king. He deserves that. You should bow down before him and say a few words about how great he is. That's what everyone seems to do when they walk in the room.
But they don't really mean it. Like, they're just saying it so they don't.
I don't know if he cares. I think he likes the fact that he has the power to get them to do it. It's that prideful of a situation here. All right, verse 19. Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. If you're using a borrowed blue Bible, it should be on page 728. I know you're not really reading if you didn't turn your page. Ha ha!
I'm reading.
All right. Page 728. Distorted with rage.
Wait.
He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Then he ordered some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king, in his anger, had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in.
So now he had no army.
Well,
All the soldiers are dead.
no, just the strongest men in his army.
Oh.
Not the whole army. It's just the strongest ones.
Yeah, you don't understand.
Verse 23. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. I was actually going to stop at verse 21. I totally forgot. Didn't want you guys to know how this turns out. But I guess we can stop here. It's still a bit of a cliffhanger. So I found this picture of a really old furnace, and they had to unearth it. It was partially buried. And you can kind of see like the old bricks over here. And the new bricks, they rebuilt it using the same quarry that these stones were dug from. It's a sandstone furnace, and it's sandstone because sandstone is like glass in that it's very heat resistant. Sand and glass share a lot of properties. The difference, obviously, sand is like little tiny bits. So when you find sandstone, it's naturally formed in nice big sheets for you. And you just cut out little brick shapes, and then you can build something that's really heat resistant. So just to give you a sense of scale, this is like a door, and then that's a gate that a human couldn't climb over. So that's pretty tall. This is a rather large furnace. Now this isn't as old as Babylon. The problem with these furnaces is since they're made out of sandstone, they don't last thousands of years. This one's only several hundred years old. Sandstone naturally deteriorates and erodes. As you can see, these old bricks are all falling apart. And so they rebuilt this half using the same techniques, the same stones. This is a video of a guy who stumbles across...
This is the top of the kiln here. You can see it's like, ooh, that's dangerous. Really dangerous. Wow. I didn't know this was going to be open like this. Usually they're filled in. Oh, that's cool though.
You can't really see because it's so bright in
I
here.
don't see any human bones in there.
Way down there is the bottom.
You can see how
That's too late,
the
baby.
edges that comes out like this and slopes to the middle. And that's where those little kilns were down on the bottom that I showed you earlier. And they would feed the stone in here and the charcoal, and it would just burn, 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 and stuff would come out the bottom. And then take the clinkers out and grind it up and make cement. That's really dangerous.
So these kinds of furnaces were used back in Babylonian times for all purposes. You used them to bake bricks, you used them to smelt gold, used them for all kinds of stuff. The one he came across and the one I showed you on the beach there, those were particularly lime kilns. And that is one of the only things we kept using kilns of that size for, because we figured out how to turn lime into cement ingredients, and you need like tons of that, and so a bigger furnace makes more sense. For other stuff like gold melting, we went to smaller scale as time went on. We just got better at making hot fires in small spaces. You used to have to build kilns this big because it was the only way we as humans figured out how to make the fire that hot. But when I say that hot, I mean close to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, seriously hot. And the way it worked is you'd go in the door at the bottom, you'd start the fire, and you'd keep throwing fuel and whatever you wanted to melt in there, in through the door, until you got to the point where you couldn't throw stuff in anymore because it was like too hot and too tall. And then you'd go up a hillside, because that's usually where you build it, next to a hill. Go up a hillside around the back and just start chucking stuff in the top. Just throwing more coal in, more raw materials you want to melt down, and just chuck stuff in the top, and you just let it burn until it goes out, until the fuel's used up. And when you go down back in the door, all the fuel's gone. What you're left with is the stuff you threw in, and it's all melted down. And so then you can pull it out while it's starting to cool, while it's still liquid, or while it's whatever state you wanted it in. It's really cool furnaces. But this is why they're able to throw whole humans into the furnace, because these things were like a well times 5. They're just these giant pits when you go up around the top side. And so when they're watching these men be thrown in, they're probably also around the top side so they can see the action. That would be the place to be. Yeah?
How did it burn, what's it called, the soldiers before they even put them in?
Because if you heat it up 7 times past what it's supposed to do, that means you're putting in 7 times the amount of fuel. So at this point, the furnace would be nearly full of fuel, all on fire, all with that much heat. And so flames would be coming straight out the top, heat would be coming straight out the top. And so just walking up to the edge to push a guy in, the heat was so extreme it would kill you just from being that close. We're talking about 2,000 degrees. You walk up to that without the proper protection, it's just going to cook you on the spot.
Isn't the sun
Just from proximity.
They couldn't just like push them?
But that's kind of the point. Like, how close do you have to be to an edge to push someone in? That distance was close enough to die from the heat.
So they basically have to walk themselves into the furnace.
Well, no, like the dead guy probably fell to the ground and pushed them in at the same time.
That's
So like
dedication.
that's how hot this thing is.
Died.
Plus they're tied up, so like they can't walk normal. They can't, you know what I mean? Like they may have even been carried. We don't know. It doesn't specify that level of detail. Yeah.
Wouldn't it, if it was like 7 times hotter, like you said, if we coming out of the top, all that heat, wouldn't the flames also but just be like out of control? They'd be like shooting out the sides and stuff.
Well, there's
as
only like the
well?
one door on the bottom, and
Okay.
yeah, it probably was going nuts. But
Yeah.
flames don't shoot in every direction without pressurization,
Okay.
and so chances are coming out the side door on the bottom would be much less
When it
flame
can go.
than coming out the top. That's the normal path of convection.
So all you
straight
need to do to really mess up somebody's furnace is just put a rock on top, like a really big
up. A
rock.
really big rock.
Just like a
You
Shoot
could probably
off
just
the
bust the
bottom.
walls, and you just have like
Then
a
it
bonfire
would-
spreading out for several hundred square feet.
God took the rock that Nebuchadnezzar threw at him, expanded it, and said, "Nah."
It's not how it goes.
Later.
All right, guys. Here's how it actually goes. Read to verse 30 with me, starting back at verse 24. But suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did." And they're so thrilled at that fact. They replied, "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed. And the 4th looks like a god." Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace. So he walked around to the bottom and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out. Come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make this decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. There is no other God who can rescue like this." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. Which is pretty cool, because they were nearly in charge of the province of Babylon to start with. That was their original position back in chapter 2 that everyone was jealous of. We've actually found Babylonian records of these 3 and figured out what their original positions likely were. And although they were in charge of things in the province, originally, as of chapter 2, they weren't in charge of everything in the province. They weren't like the top dog in the province of Babylon. They just had cush, posh jobs in the province of Babylon. 3 different jobs. And so now the king basically says, well, you can have even more power. You're more in control. You're moving up the ladder, more in charge of the province of Babylon. Yeah.
I think it's so sad about Nebuchadnezzar because he's like almost past the line to where he believes in God, but he's like, you don't say anything bad about God. You can still believe in these gods, so it's
Yeah, these other gods
so
are really,
sad.
really
It's just
important
so
still.
close.
Is this dude like bipolar?
Is he what?
Is he bipolar?
It's likely, yeah. Cody.
So he was really mad at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So why would he heat it 7 times so that it would kill them quicker?
That's what I was thinking too. But
I think he's just steamed and he's trying to do something extreme.
He's just mad.
He's just mad and he's lashing out. I don't think he's going that logical. That's like what a calm person would think of. I want him to suffer. Turn it down. Make it like just 200 degrees, like not even that hot, okay? Then throw him in. Because if you lock the door on the bottom, you still can't get out. You're still like trapped in a well shaft if the door on the bottom is
How's
locked.
he able to see them?
Just leave
Huh?
him in.
How's he able to see them?
I think it really comes down to angles, and he would probably be on like a lifted platform.
maybe he just wanted to hear the screams.
That must be how people were seeing too.
Yeah. So then, what's interesting is
He was just
the furnace was likely close to the statue for the production of the statue, for gold smelting, for bricks, for brick making. We actually archaeologically think we may have found the platform on which the statue stood. It's in a place that matches the description. It's of the right size, and so it's like this 45 foot by 45 foot square raised brick pavilion, I guess you could call it, and it's got like steps that go up the front. It's a pretty cool little thing. It's really deteriorated, you know, because it's thousands of years old. But we think this is probably where the statue was, and it's just 4 miles south of Babylon, and so they would have likely brought the raw materials there and then used these kinds of furnaces to then convert them into the purified materials or the cooked bricks they would need to then go ahead and build the platform and then the statue itself. Likely, based on what we know of Babylonian architecture, they did not make a solid gold statue. Even though they probably had the wealth to do it, we don't think they actually had the technology to do it. The ability to make a 90-foot tall, all gold structure, we're pretty sure was outside Babylonian expertise at this time. And the other things we found that they've made and left behind, they were wooden structures with sheets, panels of gold nailed to the outside. So you just roll the gold out till it's like, you know, cardboard or cardstock thick, and you just press it, hammer it around the wood, and then nail it on. And so it'd still look from a distance, I mean, because you're not going to get close to a 90-foot statue, you're going to look at it from a distance, it's still going to look like solid gold. I mean, you're still walking out in a flat land with cliffs behind it, and there's a 90-foot statue just coming up out of the ground. Like, that is an impressive thing. I don't care if it's solid gold or
Because they
plated
would have had
gold.
to have like solid steel like molds, and then they would have had to done it in parts,
In
and then they would
big
have had to find a way to
pieces.
make the parts like.
We'd have to have a
stick each
crane
other.
system or
Nine-
some kind of, you know,
Oh.
it had to be strong enough to like tip it up. That's the only other way to do it without a
Yeah.
crane, is like just slowly tip the whole 90-foot statue up. It would have just been insane for them. Yeah.
Did they use mud bricks back then, like for the buckle
Yeah,
and stuff?
they're the culture around the right time when they started getting the whole mud straw ratio perfected. So you have bricks that are actually stronger than stone, not harder than stone, but stronger than stone.
Okay, so
That's right
was
around this era.
forward.
That's why we actually have their bricks still left over, because they were the ones who were getting the bricks really good, because they use these giant furnaces. When you get the bricks up to these high temperatures, they harden better and they retain their strength longer.
What do you mean stronger but not harder?
Hardness, strongness, those are two different things. So like glass is way off the charts on hardness. It's not that strong usually.
Oh, like brittle.
Brittle, yeah. So like stone is naturally hard, not always naturally strong. Like you can throw a rock at the ground and it just splits in half.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like it's too hard for its own good in some cases. So bricks are kind of the opposite. They're a good balance of hard and strong.
Okay.
So they're less hard than a rock,
Okay.
but they're more strong than a rock. So when you try and bust a brick over your knee, you bust your knee.
Oh, that would hurt. Oh, that's-
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like splitting that brick in half is really hard.
Yeah.
But if I took like a pocket knife, I could just sit there and scratch it. Because my pocket knife is harder than the brick is. So, anyways. Useless science you won't use today. So,
Pretty much.
drawing to the end here, what we're seeing is that God is unstoppable. Nebuchadnezzar thinks he's the strongest there is. He thinks his kingdom will live forever. I don't think he's so delusional as to think he will live forever. But remember that in the dream, the gold head was not Nebuchadnezzar himself, it was Nebuchadnezzar's empire. And so he's making this whole gold statue trying to state, my empire will reign forever.
How old is this dude?
I don't actually know. I'll look into that. At this point, we are, I think, like 11 to 13 years into his reign. But I don't actually know how old he is when he started being the king. Never thought to ask that question.
Yeah.
I'll check into that. And so this is really what I pull away from all this. If we try and go against God's plan, we're going to find our path is blocked again and again. If we know what God's plan is, if we know what his will is, if we know what he said, and we try and do the opposite, we're going to find roadblocks, barricades, barbed wire. We're going to find rocks stumbling us. And this is what Nebuchadnezzar comes across. He's told by God, your empire is amazing. Your authority is so absolute. But there's going to be another empire that conquers you. And then Nebuchadnezzar's like, no! Well, God said so, so yes. No! And he's like this petulant child. No, I don't want it to end! So he does what he can. He doesn't have the ability to live forever and see that his empire survives. So instead, he just does something so impressive. And then he demands all the other rulers, all the people who might turn against him one day, come and are forced by pain of death to bow down and say, yes, Babylon's the greatest.
I
Well, we're
wonder
just
if this is
making
what
more
started
hate.
causing.
I didn't say he was smart.
I wonder
You
if
want to
this-
last forever. Like, stop killing people.
His path has never been the benevolent leader. That's not really his jive. He doesn't know how to do that. His path, his way of leadership is fear. It's absoluteness. If you listen to me, you get to live. That's the way he rules. And so he comes and says, bow down to the greatness that is Babylon, or else you die.
I wonder if this is the event that caused the Medo-Persian Empire. But you know what? That guy does not just get to be this pompous, outing himself
there's actually a
around.
lot more years that go by before we get there. So, I don't know. Maybe this started the downward, but I know they came in much later.
How many of his descendants got to rule?
Say again?
How many of his descendants got to rule Babylon?
I don't know about relations. I know there's one other dude named Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar the second.
Yeah.
But I don't know if there was other guys not named Nebuchadnezzar that were like related to him. These are good questions.
Well, I meant like his children. Like, is
Yeah, I
that
just
how
don't
it works
actually know.
out then?
Don't actually know.
Didn't he not have any children?
His children doesn't really matter.
I don't know. I just said I don't know.
No,
Who cares about his
his children doesn't really matter.
I haven't done a thorough study of Nebuchadnezzar himself in his life. I've been studying Daniel. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Just, did you know how many kings came after him? Is that still not okay?
We'll look into it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You shall.
All right. The other thing I see from this is the opposite of it is also true. If we try to follow God's plan, we're going to find our path is no longer accepted by the world. And so this is where it comes down. If you go against God, you're against God. I hope that was obvious. But Nebuchadnezzar said, no, I don't want to listen to God. I don't like his prophecy. I don't like the dream he gave me. And then, sure enough, he tries to kill God's people, and it doesn't work. God's against him now that he's walked away from God. He's gone against God. Well, guess what? Now God's not with him. But the opposite is true. If you go with God, the world will be against you. If you try to follow God, if you try and do what he wants, if you try and put him first, if you try and obey his will for your life, you'll find the world goes against you. Why is this? Why is this the case? Because God and the world are in two different directions. And you can't walk two different directions at the same time. You can't walk north and south. Oh yeah, you can give me some malarkey about a round planet, and eventually if you go far enough north, you'll end up south. But that's not the same as going north and going south at the same time. You can't do that. You can't, because when you cut yourself in half, you only have one leg, and that ain't walking, that's hopping. You can't walk in two directions at once.
Daniel,
You actually thought of that response.
Yeah, I was just gonna
This
say
is
that.
how my brain works. I know Mandy. She's gonna say some nonsense about cutting yourself in half. That's just, I know that's where she's going.
We have the science.
This is the deal though. God and the world don't align. You're never gonna find an instance where God's like, oh yeah, okay, go ahead, be a little worldly. That's okay. Just a little. That's not that bad. That's not how God sees the world. He sees the world as against him, his enemy, who he loves and doesn't want to be his enemy anymore. And so when you go to the world and try and bring them to God, that's awesome. When you go to the world and you try and be like the world, that's traitorous. And so this is where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego find themselves. How easy would it have been to just like lay down on the floor when the music starts? That is like the simplest thing in the entire world. King Nebuchadnezzar is not asking for some impossible feat. Just get down on the floor when the music starts.
You just say we're really tired at that point.
Yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna fake it. I'm just gonna take a nap when the music starts.
Tie my sandal.
There are so many ways you could have just like made the king happy and not got thrown in a furnace. But look at what their response was. I absolutely love it. They say, King Nebuchadnezzar, our God is powerful enough to save us and to keep you from throwing us in the furnace. But you know what? Even if our God lets us be thrown in a furnace, we don't care. Even if our God lets us be thrown in the furnace, we don't care. That's the end of their response.
Maybe we care a little bit.
That's not what they said.
Yeah.
They didn't say we'd prefer. They say we don't care. He can do that if he wants. And this is something we actually get from Job, which I love. It's an amazing verse. Job says that he will follow God even if he kills him. Think about that for a second. Job says, I will follow God even if he kills me.
Oh, dang.
Here's the deal. This is why. It's because Job knew, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew that God is so perfect. Every single thing he chooses to do is perfect. Save you from the furnace, let you die in the furnace was the perfect choice, whichever one he chose. And you probably won't ever get to figure out why. But he knows. He knows. And this is the crazy thing. Because we all deserve to die. If God lets you die, he's not doing something unjust. He's not doing something wrong. We all deserve to die. He's letting justice happen if we die. But if he chooses to save you, then he obviously has a plan for your salvation, for your being rescued. And so his plan, we don't get to know in advance. And so that's kind of what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say. They're like, we're going to follow God. We're not going to follow you. And we're going to do that even though we don't know what following God means. We're going to follow God even though we don't know what that means right now. If it means we get thrown in a furnace and we die, well, cool, we followed God. Then at least when I get to heaven, I can look God in the eye and say, I did what you asked. That's really the point. If you get to heaven and you're like, hey God, he's like, wow, you lived till 80. That's really cool since, you dissed me so you wouldn't die. Good job living to 80.
But 80 though. 80 is a long.
Or else you can get to heaven and be like, yeah, I died at 26 because some king wanted me to bow down to his empire. God's like, right? Wasn't that ridiculous? Thanks. I know I'm making light of this, but that's kind of the deal. You're going to spend eternity with God. Do you want the last thing you do to be praising him above all else, worshiping him above all else, putting him above everything on this earth? I would say yes. 1,000 times over, yes. If that's the last thing I get to do on this earth, yes!
Doesn't sound that bad, too.
That does not sound that bad. The guy I'm going to spend eternity with, the last thing I did on this earth was praise his name. What better thing could I do walking into heaven? What better thing could I do with my last breath? Or I could get a few mere years and diss God in the process. Really cool story. I don't know if most of you guys probably weren't alive or you were just too young to be told about it. There was a school shooting way back. It was one of the first big ones we've ever had in this country. No, the Columbine shooting. There was this girl, and the day before the Columbine shooting, she writes this note to her friend. And the note says, P.S., which I think is a funny way to start a note. It says, P.S., I think it would be amazing to live my life for God no matter what happens. And I think I'm going to try and do it. She just hands this note to her friend. And the next day, someone comes to the school with a backpack full of guns and just goes through the rooms one by one. Are you a Christian? And if they say no, he doesn't shoot them. Are you a Christian? And he knows these people. They're from his school. And so he starts picking out the people he knows are Christians. Are you a Christian? I'm pretty sure you're a Christian. I've actually seen you with your Bible.
Yeah.
Denounce Christ right now! And this girl who wrote that note the day before, she's one of the ones who stands up and says, yeah, I love Jesus Christ. And he kills her. They took that P.S. note and they actually put that on her tombstone. And so now as you walk through the graveyard, that is her last words. I mean, she had a whole day in between when she wrote it and when she died, so it's not really her last words. But I can't think of a more well-put set of last words. I think I want to live for Christ no matter what it takes. I think I really want to do it.
So.
And then the next day, that statement is put to the test. That statement is put to the test. This is where we find ourselves as Christians. We can either live our lives for God when it's easy or when it's hard. And sometimes we make our lives easy by not living for God. And sometimes we make our lives hard by living for God. See, this is where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were. If they weren't living for God in the first place, their lives would have got this hard. They never would have been put to the test. If that girl at that school hadn't been living her life as a Christian in ways people could actually notice, she would have been put on the spot. You see, when we live our lives following God, we make our lives here on this earth harder, more difficult. And then eventually, we'll get put to the test in small ways, in large ways. We don't really get to know when the tests are coming. It's like a pop quiz. You just got to make sure you're actually keeping up in class so that when the pop quiz comes, you're ready. Stay close to God so that when you're tested with your faith, He's right there. You don't have to go screaming and running and reaching for him. Stay close to God at all times. That's where I see these three guys at. They don't get up there and like see the furnace and go, oh no, God save us! They get up there and they see the furnace and they're like, yeah, it's okay. We don't really have a way to defend ourselves. We really do worship God above all else. What are we going to say? We don't? What are we going to do? Stop now? We've been doing it this whole time. So they walk into the test prepared. All right, well, if you want to kill us, that's fine. We'll go see God. If you don't want to kill us, great. If God wants to rescue us, great. Do what you're going to do. That's their mentality. They have God so close. They're like, yeah, well, if we go to heaven, oh well.
Oh,
pretty
well.
Yeah, that's a good point. If we go to heaven, yay! That's a good point. Thank you, Cody. Very well put. All right, last questions because we got to get out of here. We're late.
Don't you think it's like
I'll ask it next
don't you think it's like a coincidence, like right before the shooting happens, that she wants to give her life to God the day before?
I don't think that's coincidence at all.
It's called providence, son.
Pulled the word right out of my mouth. It's providence. Yeah.
So you probably know the story. There was like this girl where she wasn't like the person where like she wanted everyone to know she was Christian, but like someone asked her, she was like, yeah, I go to church. Well, there was a shooting at this school, and they killed. It was like the shooting you just talked about. They killed anyone who said that they were Christian, and then they come up to her and they were like, "Are you a Christian?" And it was amazing because there's actually like a documentary on it. And she says it was amazing because she says, "You know I am," and she just dropped the bomb right there. It was. They shot her like 93 times though. It was very sad because they shot her once, and then she died. Then they just kept on going. It was overkill, like. To
They
the
were
max.
very angry at that point.
Yeah.
Wow. You know I am. Could you actually say that though? That's really the question. If you were to say to someone, yeah, you know I am, would they? Like, do you think they would actually know that? Would they have the proof that they've seen in your life to say, yeah, of course you're a Christian. I know you're a Christian. Or would they have to take your word for it? And that's probably why they were so upset with her, is because they did. They did absolutely know.
And
Alright.
she's alive?
No, she
No.
didn't.
No, Ezra.
Hey, this dude got thrown in the furnace.
Hey, at camp, there was
Right.
that guy's mom who got shot in the head like 3 times.
3 times.
Three
Yeah.
times.
And she lived.
And stabbed.
3
Oh,
times.
something on the days, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was a pastor in Reading, his mom, and so they did like a video series while we were at camp where you got to like hear his life story. It was a ridiculous life story. I didn't actually catch all of them, so if you have a question about him, I might not
No,
know.
it's not him. It's probably
It
the
was
guy's
so
story.
crazy.
We gotta finish. All right, so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Follow God, the world will reject you. That's basically it. Let's pray.
Okay.
Lord, we ask for faith that stands the test. This is a tall order, and so we're just asking, Lord, draw us close and help us to grow. We don't want to be caught off guard when the pop quiz comes up, when these tests in life come up. We want to be close to you at all times, always learning from you, always drawing close to you, always being strengthened by you. We ask, Lord, that you would help us with that. We're weak, we're human, but we've seen that it's possible, that just faith in you is enough. And so we ask, Lord, that you would increase our faith. Help us to grow in these ways. We ask all that in your name. Amen. All right, guys. Sorry we're so late. If you have more questions, get on out of here. Or wait, no, the other way.
If you got more questions.
Yeah!
Questions, just leave. I'm not.
If you have more questions, come and ask them. Otherwise, get out of here.
Yeah.
If you have more questions,
Get out. That is face for
Oh, hey, Cody.
Great phone.
Chris, I'll grab your
Who's this?
iPod.
And my dad's drumming also.
who you play? Your sister? Oh, okay. That's you?
Oh, what you doing, boy?
You won. You get $1 free item from the snack
What you
bar.
doing, boy?
Aha. Not sticking around for a second?
I'm sticking around till next service.
Woohoo!
Kind of reminds me of the Clone Wars.
Yeah.
Star Wars ones
Okay,
that turn on
say
the
like
Jedi.
one of those
Except it
issues
comes
comes up, right?
It's yours?
Like, are you a Christian, right? But this is like a real gun, right? Like, obviously I can't say like no and like trick them. Like that's wrong. Obviously I can be like, no, I gotcha later. But like, is there anything wrong?
After they're in cuffs.
I gotcha. Fooled ya. But like, is there anything wrong with me just being like, just like not even just like disarming them right there if I have to?
Really, really interesting question. That's a really interesting question. So this
If
is
they're doing a movie
this is a
style.
personal conviction thing in my mind because there isn't a verse that says don't defend yourself when someone tries to attack you. There isn't a verse that says that, and so some Christians are completely convicted that pacifism is the only thing a Christian can do. Some Christians, that is 100% their conviction. I have a strange middle ground on this.
Yeah.
This is again personal conviction, not a Bible verse to back this up, but I believe in family defense. I don't necessarily believe in self-defense, and that's just my personal conviction. So if I was alone in some dark alley and someone pulls a knife on me, I probably wouldn't try and disarm them. I'd
What's the
probably
difference
try and
between
talk.
selfishness and not selfishness?
That's exactly what it is for me. I would save your life in a heartbeat. I would kick a guy's teeth in to save your life.
I would sacrifice my own life to save your life.
But
That's cool, I'm glad.
I wouldn't necessarily try that hard if I was the only one on the line.
And I wouldn't have the expectancy of you throwing yourself in front of me to save my
But I
life.
would though. That's the cheating.
But it's
But
not.
it's the mentality.
It's the mentality. See, we're talking about the hard issue of sin, not necessarily what you do is right or wrong, but my expectation. So I'm not going to be like, well, Ezra, why didn't you save me? What's wrong with you? Does that make sense? Like, that's a hard issue for me. I'm sinning all of a sudden. And so, like, the same goes on myself. If I'm willing to save myself and hurt someone else, I'm putting myself above them. But if I'm willing to save my family and hurt someone else in the process, then I'm putting my family above them. Do you see how that's different?
Little different.
Yeah, but like at the end of the day, you're still putting someone above them.
Yeah, but it's me or my family.
Yeah, and I get it.
And I can
but
put my family above them, and I don't feel any qualms about that. I don't feel any sin nature about that. I don't feel any problems with that. But putting myself above them, I do. I feel convicted about that.
But they're the ones instigating the issue. It's not like you're coming up to them like, let's fight.
God
Wait a
never
minute.
says, put others first when they deserve it.
You don't
He
deserve
says, put others first.
So,
God
I know
is
it's hard.
cheating.
These are things that we really have to work on because it's a lot of times it's a gray issue. You know what I mean? It's a gray area. It's not cut dry. God says don't have self-defense or do have self-defense.
when you use the word providence,
I need 85 cents.
say,
When you
like,
bumming
why
for
the girl
85
wrote the
cents
note
and
and
say,
then
I'm pay you like,
in
you got that
a
level,
specific
fam.
manner towards
Yes.
Christians. Or you say, what role did God play
Ooh.
in...
See, I can't even begin.
We are bordering
I
on
can't
the
even
line
begin.
of like causation.
Oh no, always. Anything God does is bordering on that. So this is where it comes
So
down.
when you use the word providence, when you say that it's not just coincidence the girl wrote the note and then a shooting targeting Christians happened, what role did God play? Did God make shooters to go attack Christians?
That's messed up.
I mean, so
there's
because
verses
I'm
that
having a lot
directly
of
contradict the allowability of that action. So God doesn't tempt people to sin.
Right.
So right off the bat, if He's gonna go shoot people, we know it wasn't God putting that on His heart. So we can outline or we can
I'll put it on this.
we can outlaw that
Yeah.
right off the bat. What we can say now is that God's doorstep is God knows the timing of everything, and so He could be pushing to get this girl close to Him before this happens because He wants her to be a testimony to thousands.
Okay.
So He could be pushing for a girl's death, and you're like, whoa, what? But because He's not pulling the trigger and He's not making the person pull the trigger,
And it's not the
He's
death.
not killing someone in
It's
that
not
instance.
the death that's concerning me because you either have the instance in which a person is okay to die because God sees they will never turn right into a Christian, and the other Christian that's okay to die whenever because they will fulfill a role that God has set for them.
Yeah.
It's when somebody it feels like their motivation for doing sin is coming from God. That was my main like concern or question.
Yeah, there's a lot of times in the Bible where God uses someone who has a motive for sin, and it looks that way. It looks like God is giving them the motive to sin. But the Bible always makes it clear whenever it can that isn't actually what's happening. That God just knows the future so perfectly that whenever someone wants to sin, He's intentionally working it into His plan so that His plan doesn't fail. If God only made plans around people who weren't going to sin, we'd have a problem.
Yeah, a lot of
We'd have a lot of. He would never get to do anything.
No, yeah.
And so He has to account for people who are going to sin, or else He isn't doing His job. He isn't actually going to be doing anything. He'd have to back out of every situation every 10 minutes because everyone sins.
Yeah.
And it's not just the big, horrible, awful sins. Like, everyone sins, and he can't be involved in those things.
Yeah.
But he can utilize those things. And so he does. Like Babylon going and destroying a country and kidnapping thousands and thousands of people. That's terrible. But he's going to use it. Heck yeah, he's going to use it.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, someone going in and doing a school shooting. That's terrible. It's
I didn't
atrocious.
even realize what shirt I was wearing until I got my truck out.
I didn't even notice till you said it.
Cash we trust.
Did you know about the Church of Cash?
Like,
It's an acronym and also serious.
I'm gonna help
It
us
was
out.
started by the guys in that crazy band, the one that just do weird music intentionally.
Insane Clown Posse.
No.
Good old ICP.
It's the one that the movie music or the movie guy is in too.
The movie guy. Oh, the movie guy. Yeah.
Who does the
Tom
music?
Selleck.
Who does the music for
Tom
like
Cruise.
Nightmare Before Christmas?
Oh, oh, oh.
James Bauer.
Rob
No.
Downey.
You hush.
Will I
You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
He's just
Love
strange,
his music.
right?
He's great.
But he has a band.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Insane
Band's
Clown
more famous
Posse.
than he is. Okay.
His music is so distinct,
You know what?
and you know
Ice
it every time you
Juggalos.
hear
Who
it.
does
They
the
follow
music for
ICP.
Nightmare Before Christmas?
That was the most amazing sound.
Danny Elfman.
Yes.
Okay.
Danny Elfman.
The Church of Cash.
Church
Is
of
this not a good
Cash.
one? Is it a good church?
Church of Johnny Cash.
I like that one.
Everyone wears black.
It's Reformed Lutherans.
Dear,
Yeah.
what kind of coffee do you need?
The large latte thing you mentioned would be great.
Iced?
Yes, please. Blended? Yeah. Yeah, they do that.
We can do
blend it.
it.
Just throw it in a blender. An iced latte in a blender.
Bob,
Do you want an extra shot in
the
there?
flame thing, except jump up and do the flame down on
Ah, yeah, you might as well do it.
it. It works so well.
Oh shoot, I was between the thing.
Oh, I was wrong. It was Jay Ernest. That's not what I read. I thought it was Danny Elfman, or the guy who works with Danny Elfman in his band.
Bob, fight Falco.
Oh, that's a different Church of Cash. It's a Johnny Cash like fan club called the Church of Cash. That's a totally different thing.
Oh no, I forgot where it was.
So maybe it's not called Church of Cash. Maybe it's like Cash Church or Cash. Maybe it's the C in Cash stands for church. Because like the church all about humanity. It's a humanism church. So they're atheists. And they have like, classic dogma of like do good to other people. Or like don't hurt, do no harm. Like that's kind of like their dogma. And like they don't do communion and read the Bible. Like they do motivational speeches and give out free T-shirts. Like no, obviously. But what's interesting is they started because some guy in a secular band thought it was a terrible injustice that Christian organizations got like tax breaks and stuff. That any religious organization got a tax break. So he wanted to create like a purely secular church
With tax breaks?
with tax breaks.
But don't you have to go?
So then he could work at the church.
The separation of church and state. Why should a church not pay taxes and badmouth the government and take sides? That's one of the reasons. Here's the receipt.
Okay, cool beans.
Does that girl leave on the cell phone here?
Caitlin, no, she hasn't been here
I think it'd be
since.
easier.
She had a wedding yesterday, and I think she's just beat today.
I'm surprised they just didn't give it to your wife.
I was kind of miffed at the whole thing because I was there late because the car broke
I
down,
know.
right? Usually every year at camp, I take all cell phones. The guys' cell phones, the girls' cell phones. I have them all myself. So then, if anything happens, I'm to blame. The church is to blame. I don't like it when my leaders take them because then, if something happens and they lose them,
They're
or something,
responsible.
they're
And
responsible.
these aren't cheap.
Yeah, cell phones are expensive now. So I apologize. If I had been there on time, we wouldn't be having this
Who's her
conversation.
husband, Jamie?
Jamie, yeah. So if you see either of them, you can poke them.
Okay, because they don't live that far from me,
Oh, you live out on that side of town?
on Eaton Road.
Okay.
West Eaton.
Well, if you want her number, you could
I-
send her a text and ask her to drive over and grab it.
Well, I got Jamie's, I think I got Jamie's number.
Okay. Yeah, if you well, you got mine. So if you
Right.
figure out you don't have it, just tell me. I'll get it to you.
I got your glasses in the car. So you gonna be up here or?
Yeah.
So you, we're not gonna come and get his glasses? You don't.
Sonia, you don't want to give me my glasses?
I tell you what he said about you too. It wasn't good. Huh?
I'll tell you if you go get my glasses.
What? Who said what about what?
That's the big question.
They're saying that Ezra said something bad about
That is actually my chair. You're right. That's
Oh, Jose, I need your address. So I know where to send the check.
Oh.
Can you write it on here for me?
Oh, they got it here.
The bookkeepers know?
518.
They got a signature.
Wow, Seamus.
I've never played as like.
We're making bombs everywhere.
I didn't know you were already reimbursing for stuff. So
Yeah,
what is it? It's 518 what?
Yeah, 'cause I had to drive the junior hire since.
Oh, okay. 518 Burn? Oh, okay. Interesting. I've never heard of that road.
And then sometimes I had to buy stuff. Oh, I bought stuff for
GBS and stuff?
Michelle.
Oh,
She forgot to buy cookies for sleepover one night.
Bob,
Costco and I
you
gave
gotta
her
get
some
your
seeds.
feet kicked out.
Okay.